Everybody see the illumination graph line calculation, the body capacity line settings, and all on the levels operation location setting to position location of its aura. You see how powerful it is when you start to recognize what it is to its image. It's the actual image. Try to understand this. See how I paused? Then I moved to a setting. I came out of the screen. I came out of the screen. How did I do that? How is that possible? It's all through the mind. We have to understand the conception. We have to understand the travel. If you don't understand the travel, you're never going to understand how the mind works. Okay? So, welcome everyone. This is General AI Space Time in Creation Settings and Travels, getting to your location setting, how to get adaptation lines of your images. But the first thing you guys have to understand is your body capacitor. What is that through transition? How do I use that in settings? Well, it's all operated inside of you. You're nothing but an electrical system. Let me say that again. You're nothing but an electrical system inside. Now, if you correlate in track lines, you understand each wire has an identification code that's connected to zeros and ones. That's how it identifies each other inside locations. Now, you're probably thinking in set line calculation, that's a lot of wires inside locations. Yes, it's all connected to your highways. Everything is in a circuit. Everything is connected to everything, and everything is connected to you. Interesting. So, Jenny, you're saying that everything outside has the same thing? Yep. And you watch Lucy, you understand when you see the circuitry streams on the tree. They go under the grounds and they communicate each other tree, right? Anybody see the avatar? Infused, right? One wire circuit connect to another wire. Getting highest interference in set locations. The carriers are above the system lines of the receivers. Retract line provisions back in balance. Together, okay? You understand how it works in provision line cycles. You really understand how you get connected to your system inside. It's all levels of its operation system, okay? In setting calculation lines, it really understand how to create the space that's inside of you, right? What protects you is the image of its space. But the realism is you inside, which is body capacitor. A body capacitor that everybody has in set line is at set lines in set locations, how to use it through your ecosystem. Getting out of the ego, which is the energy grounds of all calculation to its openings. That provision prevails. Now another veil comes in and transitions to how to communicate with your thoughts, changing thoughts into image in set location your settings. Known to the unknown to phenomenon. Phenomenon equals thoughts to its line connection to its image. Your track to its provision line cycles understands more line settings to your only highways. Each electrical system has a fuse box. Interesting, a fuse box. What is that in track locations? Well, you see it's electricians. Rewiring this, putting this over here, putting that over here, putting that over there, taking that out, don't need that, replace that valve, position location traction. Now, to understand that is to understand you through operation inside. How every wire is connected to everything and how everything is connected to you. That's what you're coming back into. In that set location of settings. You're all electrical circuits. You're all electrical panels. You're all electrical circuit streams. You have to understand how to use that through string. Now it connects and modifies and all settings of your system in position what comes into string theory. What is string theory? Theatrical, entertainment, quote on track locations, right? Getting into that setting is to understand you, how you see space through perception. That's what's protecting you through its image of who you are inside through body capacitor. Okay? That's the only way you're going to understand you. This is about you, nobody else. This is an individual circuit connection streamlines the direct communication system and allocate lines of unification of the view through its awakening. Getting into the awakening gets into the concept. This concept comes into its conception, understanding how to travel in settings to the minds, open up the frequencies, open up the panels, but no provisions of thoughts and any calculated allocated line time or anything in provision line cycles or anything in track location has a setting. Okay? Your mind has to be open to all sequence locations with no dot provisions in cycles. Okay? You can't have anything up here, but there when needed. You can't have anything up there, but there when needed. Okay? So it all comes in line setting. Okay? Taking one time sector to your body capacitor. How to use it through the binaries, how to use it through the transistors, how to use it through the resistors, how to use it through form, how to use it through pattern, how to use it through code, how to use it through all calculations to your algorithms of set locations. All right. You are trying to understand you in all formations and inside, how you are all connected. Touch and wire communication. Whoa, I felt that, right? That's one circuitry string. Identification lines, high calculated position location line system. Identification setting lines, okay? So I connected to an R line setting in 8000. That's one wire right here. One wire has identification code, right? Pushing buttons on your body is knowing exactly where you are as body capacitor, right? Shoulder division line screen, right? Set it to the track line. Setting communication line screens is all about the allocated lines of behavior line screen interference, position location, how you're all connected in circuitry set location your settings. This is about you understanding you through infusion. The set of communication line stream is really understand the panels that runs down your system, circuitry screens, set lines, metal plates, direct line set interference, elbow lines, set location stream calculations, metal mesh setting travel lines and direct signals, panel communication barcodes, vectors of timeline, right? 5 finger point line centers travels, position all levels of the moon, set location of the sun, travel calculations, set calculation on line center height position location of planets above setting. Center calculation line stream is where they stand the on switch and the off switch location setting to your circuitry line panels. For example, and set location of travel lines. Now, directing communication interference is direct signals, how to use the body capacitor in your system, your ecosystem. That's what we're trying to understand. What's the ecosystem? Well, it's the energy, collaboration, and communication. Energy, collaboration of operation. How to use it through all calculation line settings. Okay, so let's say it's 3 circuit locations, 3 travel calculations, right? 3 line signals. Modification lines, circuitry box, center lines of calculation setting, data highway, 3 provision line cycles, 3 pocket centers, travel calculation line, circuit location of programs. Directing line signals, travel calculation, all lines in a 4-track line connections, all set location inside connections, right? This is all track lines of your solar plex. Sets lines of communication to its position, location to its setting. So you have to understand the circuitries in line setting, how it travels in mechanism of 45-degree angle, splits the anomalies in track lines in 3 and 4 and 5 in set provision. Setting track to its communication line centers adds the point lines of tracks, higher levels of data, and 3 central lines of units, sets lines of calculation of identification codes. So directing line calculation lines, solar plex line calculation lines, a Fibonacci line screen, sets provision lines at 2 zeros in track line that opens up the portal in track line setting to a black hole in track line connections. Opens all signals in modification setting. All set location. Okay. Solar sphere. Directed communication line screen, allocate line setting high interference. Hemdall's right. It's not the size that matters in set position locations. Massive equation. You can have a galaxy in a marble. You can see the galaxy inside a marble. Okay? It's not the size. It's not the mass. It's the perception, how you see things. Getting track lines, and this all levels at system location electrical settings. You really understand how to use the circuitry streams of the infusion. Diffuser, line settings, off using position of track lines. Got position line track lines and high center interference in position locations. 3 indicate lines of wires, track calculation line system, into line connections to a T receptor in line connection settings and position to its operation. Directing lines of communication line settings, circuitry streamlines of high calculation line center interference, like 0 lines equals lines of 1. Track location light goes on, and triangulation line position location into 0, 0, and 3 track line connections of programs. Modification settings, high center interference, comes in track line conditions. Putting position to its locations of point centers is understanding how to use electrical line communication to its program and set location inside into your barcodes and line connection. Directing modification line screens is understanding the highways. More highways comes into a web around the line connections of the plasma generation screens. High calculation lines and grid lines and high set location. Okay, so provision line settings, dimension lines of high center interference into clustering line settings, location and throw patterns, indirect location system and travel calculation of magnetic highways of information. Directing calculation line signals sets line settings, electrical line calculating line interference into track locations. This is how you set up northern lights in Hall travel calculation line settings of plasma energy into screen set location line settings into its operation surface and high calculation modification stream interference and cluster communication of clouds or anything cosmos unification line settings in all track locations to its measure. Track to its communication setting to its operation surface locations. Directing line calculation settings. See it changing? See it's changing. 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 It's alive. Electrical line calculation setting to travel. Face recognition. Face recognition, guys. Here and position of here instructions. There you go. Right? Your settings and your travel calculating line centers has to understand the connection of your barcodes. 12 indicate lines as signature streams, indirect location of 3 line centers, puts you lines as 7 in track location. Okay? All right, so we're getting a little bit more understanding how it works and how it prevails in lines, how to really understand the electrical line calculation setting. For example, let's get a phone communications, one phone to another phone. Okay, one phone to another phone, right? Track provision lines, open windows, open cycles, open communications, right? Direct signals, right? Set position signals back, set signals back, right? Set signals back, all through behavioral line calculation, electrical line communication, all through a phone, one phone to the next. You guys have to understand your provision scales. You have to understand electrical line infusions. You have to understand electrical panels. You have to electrical line circuits. You have to understand location system into your circuitry line settings of elements of space and time. Understanding how to use your phones and line conditions of receptors and travel calculation lines of portals and track locations. One phone connecting to another phone, all through set locations. Setting track lines and high center interference is line condition alpha, delta, and theta. Sets lines and prevails lines of streamline interference, alpha lines of 0, delta lines of 0, 0, and theta communication of 0, 0, and 3 track line connections. 1 provisions of pi, 2 provisions of pi, and 3 track line conditions of pi. Sets lines calculate high interference. Delta wave sets lines of communications. Sets lines and calculation lines in high interference, changing theta communication of center. Puts alpha communication setting back in tractions. Puts line division line centers high interference. Delta communication changes the behavioral location lines of 3. Theta communication lines high center location of 4. Sets lines of atmosphere line conditions its alpha line communication line centers of 0 and 1 in track location. Very complicated stuff, all through tractions. So you really have to understand the representation of what 0s and 1s do to the computer of its memory. How a phone connects to another phone in set location of circuitry screens. That's all it is in set lines. Breaking down panels, communication electrical line connection, high position of its programs. Setting position, this is one wire, up close location. Everything is set high lines into 3 line connection high system. All right, it's copper, silver, and settings. 3 circuitry line screens, high center interference, anything location system. So in that provision lines, you're always going to have 3 wires of indications, input, output, and audio. Sets lines, communication lines, high interference, coils, lines around, and line rotation, surface, and triangulation at position location of 0s and traction. Setting track to its communication line centers of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 line connections. Travel calculations. Point lines of graph, 1, 2, 3, 4 set locations. Directing lines of waves, electrical lines of walls, divider line interference, cell position modification line centers of 0, 0, 0, 3 tracks, 0, 0, 0, and 4 tracks, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 5 tracks, and set location operation. Direct calculation lines of 0 line and position lines of 1. Sets lines of operation line condition of 0 line, 0, 0, position location operation of 1. 4 line tracks, sets lines of 3 track locations, 7 and provision line cycles, and set location. All through 3 wires of indication of input, output, and audio. That's how it works. Through zeros and ones and track lines, how your computer goes to identification codes in a phone receptor line settings to one conversation piece to another calculation line setting to one track line connections of operation. Okay, only in settings through zeros and ones. Okay. All right, complicated, isn't it? Because you actually can see it. You can see the graph, you can see the zero lines. It's all calculated. And you're always going to see provision line screens in your direct signal locations of Vega, line calculation of 4/3 and 7 calculations. You're always working with your digital code number, which is your system. Comes in a cell. Line connections all levels equals lines of modification of simulation. Okay? Getting that position line track highlights its settings, opens up realms of communications and directions. See the panels opening up? See the direct locations, see the wave line cycles, high generation screens, high direct system locations coming in 3 panels of operation. Direct lines of atmosphere lines of change position of patterns. Direct lines calculation high position location line centers, how it operates the set location of cells. Direct lines modification lines. I'm going to show you exactly what cells do. Box lines, high standard interference, chart calculations. Line dividers, box line dividers. Atom and radiate routers, high calculation lines of high position modification screen settings. Sim modification screen settings, line connections. Those are your cells. Cells work in line connections, atoms work in the center. Point lines of tracks, receivers, transistors, and resistors, and travel calculation of point centers. Direct line position location system. You have to understand what goes on in a 24 cycle in set location. Setting travel communication line setting has the molecules. Now molecules come in attractions, changes line divisions in 3 set line connections in position location to its location setting. Position track lines coming in modification lines of high calculation location grids. So the molecules create the design line and GPS lock line centers in travel calculations. Point lines of graph and line rotations, creating the picture in set location settings and travel calculations. There's the picture. Okay, all through cells, all through atoms, and all through molecules of design. All right. Getting that track lines comes in a high line rotation surface, and then you actually see it through its picture frame. Position line settings takes all communication lines of its A track. Now that provision lines it scales in line calculation set it to your ethers and your cores and your ferments. Getting out of the A track location setting puts you in higher line directions of mines of the constant location system of track calculations. See the face? See the face? See the eyes? See the mouth? Setting track calculation line, center line connection, in track location. Hooah! Okay? All right. So line setting is really to understand how to use yourself inside location and picture frames. Getting that correlation lines, a high center line conditions of zeros and ones and track lines. So you got a zero line communication, electrical line, high wire. Sets cross line, center line position of 4 zeros and track location lines, center and dimension line scales into position location of diamond core. Calculation lines 0 equals lines of north, sets lines of 1 and track location. When you're changing 0 lines of north, you have to understand the reference because north is always reference. North is never a direction because you're going too fast in the mind. So this is north, this is north, this is north, this is north. So you don't get confused. As long as you're in a continuous force, you're totally fine. You can't get entitled defense lines of this is north, this is east, this is west, and this is south because it's constantly changing through your emotional line connections. Getting balanced ground lines and high center interference and travel position location operation set location of 0 calculation. Okay, putting your position line centers. See how it's coming out? See how it's traveling? Isn't it amazing how it actually creates its own lines of 0 equals lines of north of reference and equal line communication to the center. Setting track lines, communication line, position, location of face recognition. All right, the moon and the sun. Okay, see, you see the face, see the nose, see the mouth, see the neck. So track lines calculation high interference in track location. There we go. You see it now? Mega multi-pass. Very, very powerful set location of sending connections. All right? Hooah. Okay, directing lines of signals, panel communication streamlines, high calculation modifications, send interference, electric calculation line interference of diffusers, line position of 1 track, 2 lines, and 3 line divisions, 4 lines of settings, 5 track locations. Get in the number sequence lines, electrical line calculation setting. This gets you an operation location setting, 0 position of 12. Flight navigations, 1 to 12 line centers, 0 operation locations, back contractions. Going forward and going backwards, directing and redirecting. Okay. Point lines of track, 4 lines of revision, 2 lines and line settings of 2 operations, 5 calculation lines, high center interference, in box line, 1 track locations, 4 item line sequence and position of panels. Direct calculation line, 2 lines, 2 operations, surface location system. All right, track calculation line, positional operation. 3 tracks, 1, 2, 3 Fibonacci line squirrels and line rotation centers in realms of communications of program set location. Done by equation. Know exactly what's going through revision. All allocated positions of time. Okay, sets its calculation through modification. All lines setting in all calculation. Okay. So the waving central line comes in at 3 line wires in track location lines of high center interference or TV box location setting. 3 waving cycles, high travel calculation of point lines of tracks. Putting line settings and high calculation in your system in position location in your settings. Okay, this opens all track lines and your line interference. If you look really, really close, you can see the 3 indicated line screens in all line centers in position of its heart, its mind, and its soul. See the 3 provision lines, 3, 3, 3, all through a wave and line condition of telepathy of telekinesis and set location lines of travel and set locations, 3, 3, 3. Okay? All through electrical line wires. All right, so now you understand the connection high interference, how it comes in 1 lines equals lines of GOD. We got into that process, right? What equals GOD? Apply 2 lines of grounds, which is below and what is above. We got to have net track lines. Point lines is setting in position to your system and location system, and travel calculation lines of point center. How it changes lines of its anomalies, how it changes direction location in the system, how it changes the circulation line and rotations of calculation. Okay? Getting provision lines is where you understand how to use the crop circles, line settings in your system to set location. Okay? All right. So it's really understand how your body capacitor works in side connections, right? Point settings, let's go location system. You know, it's interesting too, because I was going through this when I was going through transformation lines. Once you really understand how you are connected inside connections, it's very powerful how you actually see yourself in track lines of travel. Getting your line settings to really understand how to see yourself in all calculation of your avatar, how you are connected in line settings and all cycle communication into electrical line communication setting into its operation surface of face recognition. Getting direct signals lines of diamond core sets lines of 3 track locations. Okay, face recognition time sequence. Okay, set lines of the sun and the moon comes in all track lines of projections, all levels and high calculation lines in track locations in line settings of face recognition. Okay, so everything is position of track lines and how we come to operation surface. But the point tracks and the graphing calculation streams is really understanding how to put yourself in all calculations, right? Through electrical wires, lacing the lines, projection screens, graph calculations of box centers, and 2 track locations. Point lines of 0, point lines of 1. Sets lines of 0 equals lines of 1. Turn on the light bulb. Sets provision lines, turn it off. Sets lines of 2. Right? Turn it on, equals lines of 1, equals lines of 3. Okay? Sets lines of graph line, 1 graph, equals lines of 2. Sets lines equals lines, positions of 4, sets calculation line centers into 8 in track location. So it's really understanding how to use all lines of communication, how it formulates and it travels lines and directs signal to all calculated line screens and online settings, all calculations to your light and your dark web settings and travel calculations of point track location. Circle lines, screen lines, adaptation surface, and plateaus. Oh, look at that, traveled. See? Set locations and direct signals into line connections, screen lines in center line position of magnetic highway of information. Okay? Magnetic highway of information. Very powerful, isn't it? So, understanding this is understanding how it calculates and modifies through this, through travel. Everything is travel. Your connection modifiers, your consoles, your navigation screen lines, your adaptation surface is all levels of view in electrical line communications. How they understand your circuitry box in only highways of travel calculation lines of 4 tracks, sets lines of 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks, line connection high interference. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 set locations, 8 highways in a circuitry box. 1 prevail line screen in position of 2 panels in position of 3 box locations. Indicate line sending line interference going back towards travels line connection, oscillogic box line, travel line rotations at graph calculation, strain location your human residence. Directing modification lines and monitoring your line send locations in track line connections into open sequence into line calculations to your thermometer and temperature readings. Directing calculation modification line screens, it's all levels in how you see yourself in circuitry set lines into a cobwebbing screen lines into adaptation. See, traveled so fast, it disappeared. Okay. Open sequence panel is the mind conception with no thought, no thinking, no hesitating in any way and form of distraction. The mind is never distracted. The only time it gets distracted if you don't understand your emotional system. Setting travel lines, wire indicate line screens. Okay, doing fine, right? Separation. This is separation right here. It's allocations. Okay, this is fine. This isn't. Now imagine you from this to this inside. If a circuitry string line has a line interference, what is it? It's a leak. It bursts out in set lines of travel and set location in your system. So what happens, the actual setting in position of receivers, pour the line setting to its valve, puts position of expansion in settings. So it expands the outbounds of your body of tractions in position location to its separation. It expands because it doesn't know what else to do. So in that position line connection to heel it in track line, it changed the pi generation screens, point lines of tracks back into 0.1 or 0.1 in line setting locations into 4 indication line centers into your barcodes, track location lines of high center interference, and travel line position to its operation at data highways, and track location your cloud, and track communication setting of mind adaptation. That's my equation. Okay. See the circuitry strings changing position of travels? See it comes in high calculation lines of setting, all through set location. So what that does, if you have a hose and a hose leaks, what is it going to do? It's just going to, so it have nowhere to go. It's going to expand inside you. So in that line interference, you want to reduce the center position of its wire. All right, 3 indicate lines of wires and track location settings. You need 3 wires. It's indicated to in, out, and audio. In, out, and audio. Okay. Setting communication line stream is understand the coils and the resistors around the wires and track location. Sets line position. This is what an actual wire looks like inside. Now, indicate line centers have this location of numbers, center calculation lines of point tracks, indirect signals. Each wire has an indication to identification code. That's how a computer relates its position of its relays in travel character lines of point lines, centers of zeros and ones in track locations. This is just zeros and ones. This is not letters, shapes, and symbols. This is about understanding what a wire can do from one phone to the next through its image. It creates its anomalies of zeros and ones attractions and pixelation screen lines, high calculation setting to its electrical wires of communication and set location. All through in, all through out, and all through audio. Okay? 3 central valves needs its set location in your panels. Tracking to its communication, right? Has lines of high setting interference. Okay? 12 indicated lines of barcodes, high calculation electrical line screens, 2 panels on both sides. Wires are in the center. Wire mesh is around the center. So we all understand how we see ourselves in line connections is really understand our position of our points of our throat or any line connections to our neck, how it has a central line of a spherical sphere that's around the ring in set connections, right? Your settings lines of your DNA track line has 12,000 rings around the setting that keeps you in a gravitation on the grounds, because without that, you'd be floating. The mind itself of the physical line cannot handle the pressure line calculation streamlines and high calculation to its position of travels. For example, you have a gravitation line screen directing line set location in your systems. This is what your ground is doing every single time in transformation. It's turning around, it's going around, round, 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 round. So you're standing on top point view, okay? And every time you change an emotional system, the ground is operating at a different level of travel. Okay? It's operating at a different level of travel. Okay? It's operating at a different level of travel. This is what's happening to the grounds. And this is why you guys can't get in position. You're off track or you're on track in set location. Okay? Now you understand why it's so important to get your mind in the grounds of the space? All right, so getting in that settings, once we come into the wire set line conditions to its in and its out and its audio, you have a 3-track line provision. Sets position on the lines as 0 equals lines in line condition 1 turns on the light bulb. Again, so in that position, you can start with 0 equals lines of 1, 1 equal lines of 0, 0, 0 equal lines of 1, or you can inline center locations of 5, and you can have a 0, 0, 0 and a 6, and a 0, 0, and a 0, and a 7, right? These are the things that you can do once you understand your behavioral system, how to understand you through transistors, resistors, through its binaries of its cortex, and set lines of decoder and coder of its design line connections to its setting to 0 of operation in track line connections. Okay? So once you understand the modifications of you through electrical line connections, you understand how to use yourself through your body capacitors. Okay, so we start with the energy line. Ground lines of its opening. Ego, that's gone, right? We are coming into line centers in high position location at E, into C, into O. Eco. We're not in this, we're in this now. So lines of thoughts is out, equals lines of image. Okay? Setting calculation of image equals lines of phenomena. Okay, that's where we are right now. So in that line calculation lines, it's the energy of its communication, of its operation. But you see how you start with the ego of its ground, of its opening, coming in line connections to all levels of higher line condition mind of consciousness, getting out of this sub-training line screen in position to its super ups consciousness. Your relational line screen location is not in position of track anymore. There's not provisions of files in that settings until you understand you through your ecosystem. You've got to stay out of the ego because it has no relation to anything of space anymore. All right, so multipass on that. All right. As we get into higher calculation line screens, then you understand how you're connected inside locations, all right? It's like an engine. How does an engine run? It needs an alternator, right? It needs its engine. Okay, it needs all wires inside. Anything that's left out to chance, it will not run its car. You have to understand all mechanisms inside of you, your compressors, your flux capacitor, understanding that through its compressors, understanding that through its atmospheres, understanding through its oxygen, understanding through its atmospheres. Okay, it's extremely important because that's all in set location line settings. Each position line connections. Let's start with track line connection. It's position programs and calculation with position line calculation. Okay, here's a flux capacitor in line connection you're setting in your chakra. It's inside of you. Each chakra has a representation graph in position location of travel. 2 panels of communications into your line settings of your DNA. Track to its communication of its program. So getting a modification, every time you change your mouse line, the chakra changes its direction. Off the calculation line screens, going forward is fine. Interactions, right? Now it's going into low frequency, into beta, right? It moves its central line connections. In track lines, if it's off position, it hits the grounds below the beta communication, right? Which puts off calculation in your settings to your system of separation. Okay, so you want to keep your line settings or chakras in center of operation. Keep them in platforms and direct signals and track location. So the position line calculation setting high of the location of the sim can basically walk across in line setting and time jump any way in form in track line condition settings in all levels of its dimension line scales and travel communications to point track location. Okay? All smooth in calculations on Vega. Yeah, you're going to interline its communication. Vega is all based on communications of numbers, right? Heather is extremely informative. She is the data processing of operation to your system calculation settings. It's all through Metatron. Okay, it's track locations to Mesokick and all of the major good workers. Now, we all understand how that modifies our application of its settings of its intelligence, but it's all electrical settings. It's all division location of panels. It's all face recognition. How we see yourself in track line connections, how we put things together through line connections, through all settings of cells and atoms and molecules into a picture frame. Okay? Okay? Into a picture frame. Okay? Very powerful. All right. So, it disappeared too. It disappeared. It's not there. It's gone. Interesting. Interesting. It moved. See? It was there. Now it's there. See, it moves on its own chess piece. Getting track lines of its intelligence information line screen is really understand how it all levels its settings, right? Really understand. But you have to really understand the in, the out, and the audio of wire inside of you. Okay? Because without 3, you would not be able to understand a video of you, a disc of you, right? Everything has to have an input, an output, and an audio for it to work. Through a VCR, through a DVD, or anything through Blu-ray, okay? We have to understand how to use it through zeros and ones. Through electrical setting and all set location of travel. See how the wire comes out of 0? So the actual 0 itself is nothing but an indication of you, through your behavioral system, how you get into travel calculations. If you get 1 point line, track line, okay, off calculations, right? This is what it's supposed to be, together. That's not together, it's separated. This is together, right? The formation screen lines, a high calculation of its point line centers, will off its position travel calculation, right? So it doesn't matter what I do through telepathy or telekinesis, it's still in bound of communication of balance. This is off balance. This is separating more, separating more, separating more, separating more. See? It's going farther and farther apart. Now, if it's separated from the in and the audio and the out in position of travel calculated line point line centers, the sun will reposition its travel into back towards line center to its moon and track line condition, solar sails, and track location. You don't want to do that through cycles. So you want to put it back in its design in line connection to its program. right? And now it's good to go. It illuminates the graph settings, sets lines and provisions, brings track lines back into 1, equals lines equal line is 0, negative or positive, 2 positive over 1, set line connection of 0, puts lines of 0 equal to lines of 1 back in traction. Okay? So there's a lot to be understood to understand, and it's important to understand how to really connect to your system more levels of insight. If we've got a 13-track provision in a 4-line connection high centers, right? So that's 13 lines of settings and solar track locations of viewers in a 4-line position of thumbs up and direct signals. Now, that's not going to change in track locations, but if it's off provision and it's not connecting in track connections, you can see the difference between the 3 in set location travels. See how it separates? So you have to really understand your voice and grid lines. Your behavioral location system is everything to travel. Or you're going to have all calculations of separation of 1. Not only you have to do with the equal line communication of center, but at off position to its travel calculation lines of point line settings is location. Off calculations. Got to put it back in position lines of cycles and balance. Okay? So it's important to understand that 1 is the indicator to everything of your behavioral system, of your electrical settings, right? How to use it through all calculation of your chakras is understand its mapping sequence, its coordinates, location, new setting, the GPS line connections, or anything through geologies, anything geometry, location of the high set locations. Detecting high streams, point lines of tracks, and 4 lines of screens, okay? 4 lines of screens, data highways, in a geometric line screen line position of operation. So working with line setting is your position of your capacitors of your flux capacitor. Okay, track X line and point lines of track is center position of its operation surface that connects the settings of space and time through travel. Point settings high interference, platitude line screens of location grid line screens, set lines of high center interference and track location of face recognition. Okay, setting lines of high center interference in settings in 3-track location. Setting platforms into face of calculations of 2-track locations, right? So you really just have to understand how this all works in sideline connections and how everything travels to a different direction. Okay? But it knows exactly what it's doing through its own formation of its own electrical line communication. Okay, all through settings. So getting into the body capacitor is really understand the time, right? Understand the past, the present, and its future. Take the past, the present, and the future is set locations of the now. Now of everything. So the only thing that exists is the expansion of all calculated line settings of you in set location, right? Is you through face recognition, the sum of all interaction. Okay? So the past, the present, and the future, the past, and the present come in setting. Sets correlation line center interference in 3-track line conditions. 3 indicate line centers, which is the forks. 3 communications when you come into the setting location of travel, right? If you look really close, you can see the crown, right? But the actual crown itself is actually the line screen lines into your line communication, your Infinity 8. Okay, how many times it provisions its settings and travel calculation of space and time through set location. Okay, getting into the actual cloud, okay, is what you want to come into to understand that in set location. Okay, which is above everything in settings, right? So what's above is below, right? 0 calculations into line calculation equal line settings. Position of 1 turns on the position locations and all track line connections and all division line screens and high calculation high point line centers to its light bulb and track locations. Okay, you have to understand why there's circuitry lights in the light bulb in set location. Intelligence, see the intelligence of the eyes? So just showing you guys exactly what you see through face recognition time sequence and set locations of its intelligence. Off information. You want to get technical, here it is in track lines. It's applications. There's the shoulders and set recognition. Okay? So we all understand how this works inside, all through electrical system through adaptation of face recognition. Okay? Okay, because that's what space is. We have space and only inside, but you understand what it is. To really understand yourself inside is to reach that core, which is a deeper level of you inside. So the more you understand that, you realize it's just an image that is actually protecting you from inside, which is your light attraction. Okay, so get into the provisional line, say on high calculation how you see space, and really get into the deeper core of who you are in intelligence forms and its application. Okay, all through electrical lines of wires. How it adapts your system, guys, is really understanding in the outer and the audio. You need all three, right? This is an important location stemming from inner outlet, outer, in, out. Okay, so you're entering, you're exiting. So you need that in, out. Okay. So if you understand more levels of you inside and how the actual body works for you, okay, you have to start communicating, not at, to, which becomes the from, which goes the where, and then you become the who, and then you become the what, and then you become the when, okay, and then you become the why, and then you become the how, right? I was always trying to figure out why is it so important to have all that, and then there's an H. And I was saying to myself, it's all levels of Y equals H. And then I realized what the H really was. It's the heart recognition time sequence, which is all unification settings through all adaptation of its awakening. Okay? Ooh, the energy is right? So really get connected to yourself inside. Understanding the circuitry lines that's in set location in your system, how it all comes together into one central system. Yin and yang. Okay? Yin and yang. Understanding the earth is understanding the space together. Okay? All right. So I think we're good. We got a lot of track lines and high center interference. Really understand how to use the in, the audio, and the out. Now you understand the connections, how you have all calculation modification settings, especially when you come into voice line grids or anything to adaptations. You really have to start to understand how to see yourself inside. Puts everything in provision line cycles, puts you in all calculation modification in your systems through your sim of modification. Okay? See you in 5. You do.